Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do lab 4.4 today. And in order to do lab 4.4, we need some data from, I think, lab 3.4, which created a dummy file with some Dillard's data downloaded and a dummy column added on the end for Arkansas. Now, if you remember when we worked through the chapter 3 labs, I couldn't get to that. So you will need to go back and work through lab 3.4 to create that file with the dummy last column. Now I've just done this and I've saved it here. I've called it lab 3.4 dummy. Now when you do this on the University of Arkansas system, you have an S drive which gives you a documents location where you can save things. So you can create that file. Look, I was trying to make this work locally, but it won't. So we're going to have to do it on the Dillard service. And because I can't really share the file with you, you'll have to create that yourself. Okay, so what we're going to do in this exercise is we're going to use Tableau on the University of Arkansas website. Now I've logged into this similarly to the way I've logged in before. So let's move on with this. So in lab 4.4, we're going to be looking at the Dillard's data again. We're going to start with that dummy file and we'll be using Tableau, and we're going to be doing all of this on the Arkansas website. Okay, so we ran a bunch of regressions, asked a bunch of questions way back in chapter 3. So first thing we want to do is we need to extract, transform, and load. So we're going to get that Excel data basically loaded up into Tableau. So let's start Tableau here at the University of Arkansas. Just click on that, start Tableau. Tableau at the University of Arkansas is a bit slow starting, so I paused it for a few seconds there while that was happening. And now we're going to be connecting to a file. So we're going to be connecting to a Microsoft Excel file. So let me just double click on that. And we're going to be accessing this in the documents there. And there's the lab 3.4 file that I created before. Okay, so let's just, actually hang on, it's actually showing me, looks like I can access stuff. Oh, because I'm sharing my own drive. Let me just check that. No, I had a look and I thought I could probably download the lab 3.4 dummy and give it to you, and then you can upload it again. But really, the Dillard's data should stay on the University of Arkansas system. So let's not be smart. So there we've got the lab 3.4 dummy file. So if I just double click on that to open it, and now we're going to get Tableau to run a regression for us. So let's just click update to make sure the data is in there. And I think it's all loaded. So we now just click on sheet 1 down here at the bottom left. And at the left, we have the table or information about the table that we brought in from Excel. So just follow the instructions in the lab. When running a regression in Tableau, you will want to place your explanatory variables on the columns and your dependent variables on the rows. What's the question that we're trying to ask? We're trying to look at spending patterns. So drag and drop the Arkansas dummy measure to the columns shelf. Okay, so Arkansas dummy to the columns shelf, and the transaction amount measure, amount, takes a while to execute that. I'll just pause. Just unpaused to let you know it's been going for 2 minutes already and it's still going. So I'll let you know how long it takes when it finishes. Okay, and it took about 2 minutes and 2 seconds. So don't be surprised if it takes a while. So if you're doing that now, you'll need to pause the recording while that happens. The other thing that we want to drag across, we're going to try to explain the transaction amount. So take the transaction amount, sorry, I should click on it properly, transaction amount, and put that in the rows. Now, the issue with this, of course, is that we're wanting to be running a regression, so we don't actually want sums up there. We want to look at the individual transactions, not the aggregates. So what we're going to need to do is go to the Analysis tab up here and unclick Aggregate Measures. Okay, so that rather than being sum, this might take a while, we've got the raw numbers. Okay, I've just unpaused. You may have noticed that a little bit more time has elapsed since I paused because I realized I didn't create the correct file back in the original Chapter 3 lab. So we've got 3 dummies from there. We've got the Arkansas dummy, the Dillard credit card dummy, and the online dummy. So we'll have a look at those in a minute. Anyway, back to the lab. We've turned off the aggregate measures, so we've got the values, and this isn't really telling us a lot. We've got the values of the Arkansas dummy there. There's lots of ones and there's lots of zeros, and they're mapped against the transaction amount. Now, even though this these diagrams don't look particularly fantastic, we have actually done, by including that trend line, we have actually done a regression. So if you hover over the trend line, hopefully, if you hover over the trend line, it'll actually give you the regression. Now, as you can tell, it's very low powered, but the transaction amount is a function of the Arkansas dummy plus 18.9 whatever. So what's that suggesting to you? The p-value is very low, so that means that this is actually telling you something. So there is a relationship, but the R-squared is also very low, so that's telling you the relationship is very weak. So essentially, reading that regression, it's telling you that on average, outside Arkansas, the average transaction amount is $18.29, but inside Arkansas, on average, it's $18.29 plus $9.44. Okay, can you draw, so is there a relationship? Yes, but that equation is explaining very little of that change. You know, 0.004, that's less than 1%. So something's going on, but you can't really rely on it a lot. And actually, if you're quite honest, and you look at this, here's the range for Arkansas, and here's the range for non-Arkansas. So, and it's really hard to tell where most of the data points are. Like when you actually click on here, it gives you individual points, but it looks like probably Arkansas has a lot more up here, and you can't tell from the way this is displayed. Maybe there's a lot more further down here. I wonder what would happen if I did a box and whisker plot. Let's choose that, see if it changes the layout. This is actually a little bit more useful, to be honest. If you did a box and whisker plot, it actually shows you the spread for Arkansas. No, it's not showing a slide at all. So for Arkansas, this is not the way I want to see it. So let's just undo that. Okay. So basically, the graphs aren't telling you a lot, but we've actually used them to give us a regression, which is what we've been using Tableau for here. Now, since we're doing a comparison between Arkansas and not Arkansas, let's also have a look at online versus not online, and use of Dillard's credit card versus not use of Dillard's credit card. So the two other dummy variables that we're going to be looking at are online dummy. Now remember, in the previous lab we saw Mormel. Turns out Mormel was the online fulfillment center, so that's why it's called Mormel Online. So online dummy is set to 1 where the sales shop is Mormel, and DLRD dummy, they had a I think a tender type, It's just how did they pay? Did they pay with a bank card or did they pay with a Dillard card? So if it was DORD in that variable, we set Dillard dummy to 1. So we can have a look at these as well in a similar way to the way we've just looked at Arkansas versus non-Arkansas. So we're going to ask the question, are transaction types bigger or smaller if there's an online transaction? And are they bigger or smaller if they're using a Dillard in-store credit card? So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the online dummy, which is here, and add it to the columns. And wait for that to happen. And now we're going to take the Dillard dummy and also add that to the columns and wait for that to happen. And there we are. Now remember, the diagram's a little bit strange because the right-hand side variables are dummies. So they're either just 1 or 0. So these are the strangest graphs you're ever going to see. But if you hover here over the online dummy, is there an effect for an online sale? So average sale which isn't online is $18.33, but an average sale which is online is $13.48 more. Is that effect strong? Not really. R squared at 0.005, so a very weak effect. But a p-value, very low p-value, means the effect does in fact exist, even though it's quite small. Bear in mind that if it's online, the online fulfillment center is in Arkansas. So if an online sale happened, in the first model here on the left, it would have counted as Arkansas, even though they might be selling to anywhere. So maybe when we were looking at the Arkansas effect, we should have only set Arkansas to 1, and maybe we should have excluded all of the online transactions to make the store comparison meaningful, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense to compare a physical store to an online fulfillment center. Lastly, let's look at people who use the Dillard credit card. Let's just move these show me things out of the way. And the credit card, this is actually quite interesting, isn't it? On average, people who don't use a Dillard credit card spend $19.71. People who use a Dillard credit card spend less by about $2.39. Does that mean they're poorer? Does that mean they're more frugal? Draw your own conclusions. I mean, store credit cards aren't very common these days. I mean, people have a MasterCard or a Visa or a Revolut, which is a type of Visa I just got recently. So why would somebody use a store credit card? You know, a store offers a credit card because it locks people into buying from them. You can only use that credit card in their store, so people will think of you before they go elsewhere. And maybe you give them some good terms. Now, it's up to you to conclude whether those sort of people who use store credit cards are poorer or not. So now that we've got those analyses, have a go at answering those part 4 questions. Okay, and think about what other questions might be, what other analyses might be useful. Now, I'm trying to think whether I could actually do a meaningful regression here, and I was thinking of maybe relating transaction amount to sale price or original price, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Oh, actually, maybe it does. If I want to ask the question, are they buying? So I'm just going, I'm going to remove these. It'll take a while, so I'll just remove all. What I did just to see what else would come up was I tried to see whether transaction amount is a function of sale price. So our transaction is bigger if the sale price is bigger. So do people, well, clearly that's going to be true, right? The sale price is bigger, the transaction amount is going to be bigger. So that's a bit stupid, but this is interesting. Look at how it's sloping up here, but it's also sloping down. We've got some negative transaction amounts. There's some weird stuff going on there. So maybe included in those transactions are refunds. So one thing we're going to, one thing this is telling me is this data is not very clean. It should have probably been cleaned to exclude negative transaction amounts. Anyway, so that is Lab 4.4. All done. Feel free to play with the data a bit more if you want. Um, state, transaction date. I wonder if we could look at whether we'd need to set up dummies. Like what could be interesting is are transaction amounts bigger around Christmas, or given this is America, bigger around Thanksgiving? That would be an interesting question, but we need to go back to the Excel file and create some dummies. So maybe if I just close that for a second and I open the dummy file, we'd need to reload it in after we did this, but let's say you were interested in whether transactions in December were bigger than the rest of the year. Actually, I just realized that was a stupid question to ask, because when we created the query to extract this data, we only extracted half of September. So we've got a lot of transactions here, but we've still only got half of a month. So it's that question would be interesting, but we need to set up a different query to get to it. Okay, so we're done. There's some questions for you at the end.